My name is Evelyn Harper. I am 29 years old, and there is one sentence my mother said that even now, whenever I remember it, I can still hear it clearly, like a glass shattering against a tile floor. If you had ever done something worthwhile with your life, I would not have had to explain you to everyone. She said it in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner in front of 31 relatives, in front of my younger sister, in front of my sister's fiancé, and even in front of Grandma Eleanor, who sat silently in her wheelchair at the far end of the room. No one laughed. There was only the sudden halt of knives and forks against plates, as if all the air had been pulled out of the room. The most painful part was not the sentence itself. The most painful part was the expression on my mother's face when she said it. She did not shout. She did not lose control. She spoke in a tired, gentle, almost pitiful voice, as if she were the one who had suffered through me for too long. In that moment, I understood a chilling truth. For 7 years, my mother had not only told the wrong story about me, she had made the entire family believe that pitying me was a form of kindness. If you have ever been misunderstood by your own family, comment "I understand." And if you want to hear more heartbreaking family stories like this, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. I sat at the end of the table where the chandelier light did not quite reach my hands, resting on the cream-colored napkin. My mother had proudly said she had spent all morning ironing flat. In front of me was a plate of turkey I had barely touched. Across the table, Claire, my younger sister, lowered her head and stared at the sparkling engagement ring on her finger. My father held his wineglass, his eyes fixed on the table. He had always been like that. Whenever my mother twisted the truth, he chose silence, as if silence could do no harm. But that day was different. I felt my grandmother watching me from the end of the room. Her eyes were not begging me to endure it anymore. They looked like a door that had finally opened a crack after years of being locked. Then Uncle Nathan's phone buzzed. Then 2 more phones lit up. No one knew that within just a few seconds, the story my mother had written for 7 years would begin tearing itself apart in front of everyone. But to understand why that moment left the whole room frozen, I have to take you back to a night in March in Connecticut, when my life first split in two. That night was a Tuesday night in March, so cold and quiet that the sound of the heater in my dorm room felt like someone breathing behind the wall. I had fallen asleep over my data structures textbook. Back then, I was a junior studying computer science at the University of Connecticut, still believing I had a different future waiting for me. My phone buzzed at 2:04 in the morning. It was not my mother. It was not my father. It was Mrs. Laura, Grandma Eleanor's neighbor in Bridgeport. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong, because her voice was shaking so badly that every word seemed to break apart. "Evelyn's sweetheart, your grandmother fell in the kitchen. The ambulance just took her. They said it might be a stroke." I sprang up, yanked my coat off the back of my chair, shoved my wallet and car keys into my pocket, and ran down the stairs. There was only one thought in my head. I had to get there before it was too late. The first person I called was my mother. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice heavy from being woken up. "Evelyn, do you know what time it is?" "Grandma had a stroke." "She is at St. Vincent's? Can you go there?" I waited for a question, for even a flicker of panic from a daughter who had just heard her mother was in the hospital. But all I got was a sigh. "She is old, Evelyn. These things happen. I have an important case file in the morning. Call Claire." Then she hung up. I stood in the parking lot, the cold wind slapping my face, the phone still pressed to my ear. Some moments make you grow up, not over years, but in the single beep that follows when someone leaves you. I called Claire. She answered faster, but there was nothing in her voice for me to hold on to. "Evelyn, I cannot go. If I miss my morning class, Mom will be furious." "Claire, it is Grandma." "I know. But what can I even do from here?" No one came. I drove 4 hours through the dark from Stores to Bridgeport. No coffee. No music. No one in the passenger seat. Just the headlights cutting across the highway, and one question repeating in my mind. If I did not go, who would be there with her? When I walked into the intensive care unit, the smell of antiseptic hit me in the face. Grandma Eleanor lay in the bed, one side of her face slightly drooping, her left hand motionless beneath the white blanket. The woman who used to braid my hair every Sunday morning now looked so small that I almost did not recognize her. She opened her eyes when I touched her hand. Her weak fingers tightened around mine. Behind the oxygen mask, she tried to say one very quiet sentence to me. I will tell you that sentence later because it kept me alive for many years. But in that moment, inside that cold white room, I understood only one thing. No one else was coming. The doctor said Grandma Eleanor would need at least 6 months of recovery. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Someone to help her eat, bathe, change her dressings, learn to stand again, and learn to hold a spoon again, one small movement at a time. The social worker handed me the price list for in-home care. I looked at the fee, then looked over at my grandmother sleeping behind the curtain, and my throat closed up. $42 an hour. Her pension was only enough to cover the rent for her small apartment in Bridgeport and a few basic prescriptions. My mother knew that. My father knew that. Claire knew that too. But in the calls that followed, everyone had a reason that sounded just reasonable enough to keep them from having to step inside that room. I returned to school on Monday morning after 3 nights, with almost no sleep. Professor Alden, my academic advisor, sat across from me, his hand resting on the leave of absence paperwork. He always had a coffee stain on his sleeve, but his eyes were clear. Evelyn, you can take a temporary leave. Do not call this giving up. This is something that needs to be done. I nodded, but when I picked up the pen to sign, my hand still trembled. Not because I did not want to take care of my grandmother. I did. I just knew that the moment the ink touched the paper, many people would only hear a shorter, easier version to judge. Evelyn dropped out. I packed up my dorm room in silence. 4 cardboard boxes, an old laptop, a few programming books, and a hoodie with the school logo on it. That afternoon, I called my mother from my grandmother's small kitchen. In the living room, the rented hospital bed had been placed near the window. Grandma was asleep, her left hand slightly curled on top of the blanket. I requested a temporary leave, I said. Grandma needs someone with her full-time. The other end of the line went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from emotion. It was the kind of silence that belongs to someone calculating how badly this would embarrass her. Do not tell the relatives, my mother said. Why? Because I do not want people thinking our family cannot handle its own matters. But that is the truth. Her voice dropped flat and cold. The truth is that you dropped out, Evelyn. They do not need to know anything else. I looked at my grandmother through the doorway. I wanted to scream that I had not dropped out, that I was choosing family. I wanted to ask why my sacrifice had become something my mother was ashamed of. But Grandma had just come home from the hospital. The apartment needed quiet. She needed me to stay calmer than an argument. So I said nothing. And that silence gave my mother the first pen. She began writing a different version of my life, one where I was the daughter who lacked discipline, and she was the suffering mother forced to hide her disappointment. I did not know the lie would live longer than I expected. It would follow me into every party, every phone call, every pitying look. And the longer no one corrected it, the more everyone believed it was true. That July, my family gathered at Aunt Margaret's house in Glastonbury. Out in the backyard, there was the smell of grilled meat, children running through the sprinklers, and adults laughing beneath strings of yellow lights. From the outside, everything looked warm like a summer postcard. Only I knew that a house full of people could sometimes make you feel lonelier than a hospital hallway at midnight. I did not want to go, but Grandma Eleanor had spent 3 months learning how to sit upright in her wheelchair again, how to hold a fork without dropping it on the floor. She said she wanted to see the family. I could not say no to the woman who had fought to survive, just so she could sit in that afternoon. We arrived nearly 40 minutes late because her physical therapy session had run long. I pushed her wheelchair through the back gate, and immediately the air changed. Conversations softened. A few people looked at me for too long, then looked away too quickly. Aunt Margaret came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Evelyn, are you all right? Your mother told me everything." By the drinks table, my mother stood among 3 relatives holding a tissue, her eyes just red enough for everyone to see. She had been crying. She looked at me then, immediately lowered her head as if she could not bear the pain I had caused her. "What did Aunt hear?" I asked. "Aunt Margaret style. That you dropped out. That your mother tried everything she could, but you refused to let anyone help you." I felt heat rise in my throat. That is not what happened. Grandma needed full-time care. I only took a leave of absence. "Evelyn, please." My mother's voice rang out, soft, trembling, perfect. "Not here. Not today." With one sentence, she turned me into the troublemaker and herself into the woman trying to preserve the family's dignity. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. No one asked why Grandma was in a wheelchair. No one asked where my mother had been when the ambulance took her away. They only looked at me like I was a crack in a beautiful vase. I stayed silent. Grandma lifted her hand and gently squeezed my wrist. Her hand was weaker than before, but there was a clear command in that squeeze. "Not yet." For the rest of the afternoon, I sat in the corner of the yard in front of a plate of cold food. One by one, people hugged my mother, patted her shoulder, and told her she had to stay strong. That was when I realized something. The person who truly sacrifices often has no stage, while the person who tells the story best receives every embrace. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire appeared. "Mom is really upset. Why do you always have to make everything about yourself?" I read that sentence under the streetlights. Then I turned off the screen, put the phone into the car console, and drove Grandma home in silence. That night, as I helped her into bed, I heard her whisper, "One day they will know." I did not believe her. Back then, I only thought that some lies, when protected by an entire family, could become the truth faster than any explanation ever could. 6 months later, Grandma Eleanor could move herself from her wheelchair to the sofa, make herself a cup of tea, and scold the people on the evening news as if they could hear her. To outsiders, those were only small signs of progress. To me, every time she managed to lift a spoon to her mouth by herself, it was a victory. No one in the family came to witness. During the day, I took her to therapy, cooked soft meals, recorded her medication schedule, and called the insurance company. At night, after she fell asleep, I opened my laptop on the kitchen table. Bridgeport sank into a cold, old silence, and I studied Python, JavaScript databases, and system architecture. I no longer had a lecture hall, but I still had stubbornness. Money, however, could not be stubborn in the same way. Grandma's medication costs rose month by month. Our savings grew thin like a sheet of paper folded too many times. I took jobs fixing websites for bakeries, dental clinics, landscaping companies, anyone willing to pay $15 or $20 an hour. Some nights I wrote code while listening to Grandma cough, wondering how exhausted a person could become before she stopped recognizing herself. Then I saw an internship posting from a small software company in Hartford called Northline Tech. They did not require a college degree. They only wanted someone who could do the work. I submitted my application at nearly 2 in the morning. A week later, they called me for an interview. The hiring manager, Paula, smiled through the screen and said, "Evelyn, you are exactly the kind of self-taught person we need." I received the offer letter on a Thursday afternoon. I sat frozen in front of the screen for a long time, afraid to breathe too deeply, as if too much happiness might make everything disappear. I planned to use my first month's paycheck to cover Grandma's medication, buy her a better wheelchair cushion, and maybe buy myself a pair of shoes that were not peeling at the soles. On Friday afternoon, Paula called again. Her voice was no longer warm. "Evelyn, I am very sorry. We recently received some concerning information. The company has to withdraw the offer." I felt my heart drop somewhere very low. "What kind of information?" "Someone in your family contacted us. They said there were concerns about your reliability." "I am sorry, but we cannot take that risk." I did not need to ask who. Some knife wounds tell you whose hand held the blade just by the shape of the cut. That night I drove to my mother's house. She was watering a rosemary pot on the front porch, so calm it made me feel cold. "Did you call Northline Tech?" She did not blink. "I have no idea what you are talking about. Someone in the family told them I was unreliable." She set down the watering can and looked at me the way someone looks at a child arguing because she was not allowed to have candy. "Maybe they simply did not want you. Not everyone is going to hand you opportunities, Evelyn." Then she went inside. The screen door closed with a dry, sharp sound. That night I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. Grandma rolled her wheelchair out of the living room and looked at me in silence. I thought she did not know anything. I was wrong. From that night on, someone began saving evidence for the day. I would finally be strong enough to stand up. After the night I lost the opportunity at Northline Tech, I did not cry right away. Some pain is so clear that tears cannot arrive fast enough. I just sat in front of my laptop staring at the black screen reflecting my own face. And for the first time I understood that if I kept letting my mother know where I was trying to stand back up, she would always find a way to place her foot, right there. So I stopped telling. I posted nothing online. I told no relatives. I shared nothing with Claire. I explained nothing to my mother. I turned the silence. They had thrown at me into a locked room, and then I began building inside it. The first idea came from a small client in New Haven, a transportation company with 3 trucks and a dispatcher who always called me in a panic. Their delivery schedule was tangled like a forgotten coil of wires in a drawer. Drivers were assigned overlapping routes. Shipments arrived late. The owner lost hours every day fixing mistakes that software should have been able to handle. I wrote a simple tool to organize routes, track orders, send delivery time reminders, and gather the data into one easy-to-read dashboard. When I installed the trial version, the owner looked at the screen and said, "Do you know this just saved me 11 hours of work every week?" That sentence stayed in my mind longer than any insult my mother had ever given me. In January of the following year, inside that small kitchen, with the heater rattling in the background, I decided to turn that tool into a real product. There was no stage, no announcement. Just me, a cold cup of coffee, Grandma sleeping in the living room, and a quiet feeling that if I did not save myself, I would drown inside the story someone else had written for me. I registered the company under the name Alderbridge Systems. Alder was the tree my grandmother loved, and bridge was the bridge I reminded myself I had to build instead of waiting for someone to pull me out. I did not use the Harper name. I used my grandmother's maiden name, Parker. On paper, I was Evelyn Parker, founder of Alderbridge Systems. No one in the family would connect that name to Evelyn Harper, the daughter they had decided was a failure. One morning when I told Grandma she was eating scrambled eggs and toast, her blood pressure pill sat beside her glass of orange juice. "Grandma, I am starting a company." "A real company?" She looked at me over her old glasses. "Finally. I cannot tell anyone. Not Mom. Not Claire. Not Uncle Nathan. Good. It might fail." She set down her fork. And it might live. So stop sitting there asking fear for permission. Go work. 2 weeks later, she called me into her bedroom. In her hand was a check for $3,200, almost everything she had managed to save. Grandma, you cannot give me this money, I said. She held my hand. Her left hand was weaker now, but her eyes were not. I did not raise you so you could live small. Take it. Buy whatever machines you need. And do not insult me by promising to pay it back. I bought my first server with that money. From the spare room in my grandmother's apartment, sitting on a folding chair that made my back ache, I wrote the first version of Alderbridge. No one clapped. No one knew. No one could ruin it. And for the first time in years, silence no longer felt like erasure. It felt like dark soil, where something was quietly taking root. The first year of Alderbridge Systems was nothing like the startup stories people like to tell later. There was no glass office, no investor handshake, no team photo with everyone smiling under beautiful lights. There was only me driving my old car through small towns in Connecticut, carrying my laptop into transportation offices that smelled of burnt coffee and warm printer paper, then sitting beside dispatchers one by one to teach them how to use the software. The first client was the company in New Haven. The second came from one of their friends in Shelton. The third was a small fleet in Springfield. They did not know I had once been called a dropout at a family dinner. They only knew my software helped their trucks reach the right place at the right time with less chaos. For me, that was enough. The first year's revenue was only enough to cover expenses, pay for Grandma Eleanor's medication, and keep the apartment from drowning in envelopes full of bills. But every dollar that entered the company account felt like a small brick placed on the ground my mother had once tried to turn into mud. In the second year, referrals traveled faster than advertising. Drivers told other drivers in parking lots. Warehouse owners told other warehouse owners during irritated early morning calls. I hired my first employee, Marcus, a programmer in Philadelphia, who never asked whether I had a college degree. He only looked at the system, stayed silent for a few minutes, and then said, "This thing has a real backbone." I remembered that sentence because it was one of the first pieces of recognition that came without conditions. By the third year, Alderbridge was serving more than 80 clients across multiple states. We had a small remote team. Grandma had a new wheelchair, the kind with a soft cushion and reliable brakes. I moved out of the apartment that faced a brick wall and into a place with a window where I could see a little piece of sky. Everything in my life was changing. But at the family dinner table, I was still Evelyn, the daughter who had never done anything. That Thanksgiving, my mother sat beside Claire and told Aunt Margaret that Claire had just been promoted. She smiled brightly, the kind of smile that made a room light up because she wanted it to. When someone asked what I was doing, my mother answered for me before I could open my mouth. Evelyn is still doing a few little computer jobs. She is trying to find her direction. I looked down at the napkin in my hands. At that moment, my company was paying salaries to 6 people. There were businesses depending on the software I had written, so their goods would not get stuck halfway down the road. But in that room, I had still been shrunk into a girl who fixed printers for relatives. If you have ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, comment number 1. And subscribe to the channel if you want to follow this story, all the way to the moment the truth is finally exposed. From the end of the table, Grandma Eleanor watched me for a long time. She said nothing. She only shook her head slightly, as if reminding me to save my strength. I understood that look. Not yet. Not because I was weak, but because what I was building still needed to grow larger in the dark. That night as I drove her home, she asked me if it hurt. I said no. She looked out the car window, her voice calm. "You are getting better at lying." I let out a quiet laugh, but my throat tightened. Some victories cannot be shown to your own family, because that family is only waiting for one small opening to turn them into mistakes. So I kept building, not so that I could shame them one day, but so that one day, no matter what they said, my life would still stand firm without needing their approval. In January of the following year, I ran into Uncle Nathan at a supermarket in Bridgeport. I was standing in front of the dish soap shelf comparing the price of each bottle, as if a few dollars could still decide the shape of an entire week. Even though the company already had clients, I had not yet learned how to spend money without calculating an escape route. When you have lived too long inside scarcity, you hear the sound of bills before the sound of relief. Evelyn. I turned around. Uncle Nathan stood at the end of the aisle holding a shopping basket, his hair grayer than I remembered. He was my mother's younger brother, the man who had once taught me how to drive in my high school parking lot, the one who had always sent birthday cards until even those cards disappeared. He set the basket down and hugged me. The hug lasted longer than politeness required. It made my body stiffen because it had been a long time since anyone in my family had touched me without pity attached to it. "I missed you, Evie," he said. "Your mother told me you did not want contact with anyone." For a second, the sounds of the supermarket and the rolling carts faded away. "She said that." He frowned. "She said you were struggling and needed space. She told me not to call because I would only make things worse." 4 years of silence came down on me all at once. I had thought Uncle Nathan believed my mother's story too. I had thought he had chosen to stand with the people who looked at me as if I were a failure. It turned out he might have been locked outside by another lie. I never said that I replied. Not once. His face changed. Not with complete surprise. More like someone who had heard a crack inside the wall for a long time and was only now seeing a whole sheet of paint fall away. "Come sit in my car for a while," he said. We sat in his car for nearly 40 minutes. I told him about the night Grandma Eleanor had the stroke, about how my mother did not come, about the leave of absence form, about the July gathering, about the story my mother had built, and about how every time I tried to explain, she cried first. I did not tell him everything about Alderbridge. Not because I did not trust him, but because that secret had become a roof I could hide beneath during the storm. Uncle Nathan did not interrupt. He just sat still, both hands resting on the steering wheel. When I stopped talking, he exhaled very slowly. "She controlled the story," he said. I nodded. Only 5 words, but they made me want to cry more than any comfort could have. For the first time, someone in the family did not ask why I was so sensitive, did not tell me to let it go, did not try to make my mother look better. He named exactly what had happened. Before I got out of the car, he handed me a business card. He wrote a financial newsletter for the tech industry, a half-serious, half-unusual job he had always been proud of. "When you are ready to say more," he told me, "I am here." I put the card into my wallet. One thought flashed through my mind quickly. If the truth ever needed a witness, maybe Uncle Nathan would be the first person who would not look away. That evening I went back to Grandma's home. She was sitting by the window. I told her about Uncle Nathan. She only nodded, as if she had been waiting for that first crack for a long time. "Houses built out of lies," she said, "do not collapse all at once. They collapse one sound at a time." Back then I did not know the loudest crash was still ahead. 3 months after my meeting with Uncle Nathan, Alderbridge Systems received an email from an investment fund in San Francisco. At first I thought it was an ad. The subject line was too short, too calm, nothing like something that could make a person sink down onto the kitchen floor. "We would like to discuss your first funding round." I read that email over and over while Grandma Eleanor slept in the living room. A small lamp cast light across her face, softening the wrinkles around her eyes. I remember the feeling very clearly. It was not joy. It was not pride. It was a strange kind of fear, because when a big door opens, someone who has been locked away for too long does not step through immediately. They stand there and wonder whether someone is hiding behind it, waiting to slam it shut. I flew to San Francisco on an April morning wearing a black blazer I had bought from a secondhand shop in New Haven. Their building was tall, bright, and cold, overlooking the bay. In the conference room, 3 men and 1 woman spoke to me about growth, the transportation market, scalability, and numbers I had once only dared to write in spreadsheets at midnight. At the end of the meeting, they placed a term sheet in front of me. Alderbridge Systems was valued at $12 million. I stared at that number for a long time. Not because I did not understand it, but because another voice was still echoing in my head. My mother's voice at the dinner table. She just does a few little computer jobs. She is still trying to find her direction. I signed under the name Evelyn Parker. Not Harper. Parker was Grandma's maiden name. It was the name of the woman who had given me $3,200 and told me she had not raised me to live small. From that day on, every legal document, every investor email, and every company profile used the name Evelyn Parker. I was not hiding because I was ashamed. I was hiding because the last time I let my family see an opportunity of mine, that opportunity was destroyed by a phone call before it even had the chance to begin. News about the funding round appeared quietly on a few tech websites. There was no portrait. I refused to be photographed. The article only had a picture of a shipping container and a few lines about software that optimized operational chains. Uncle Nathan even mentioned Alderbridge in his financial newsletter, calling its founder Evelyn Parker a name worth watching. He did not know it was me. I read that line in my small apartment and laughed softly. It was not the laugh of victory. It was the laugh of someone watching a seed they had hidden underground finally break through into the light. But Grandma knew. One October afternoon, she called me into her room. On her lap was an old shoebox. Inside were a few photographs, birthday cards, and an email printed out from years earlier. The email was from my mother to Northline Tech's Human Resources Department. In it, she wrote that I had a history of being unreliable and that the company should be careful about hiring me. Every word on the white paper looked like dried blood. "When did you keep this?" I asked. "From the week it happened," she replied. "Your mother used my computer and forgot to log out. Why didn't you tell me?" Grandma placed her hand on mine. "Because back then you would have run straight to confront your mother, and she would have crushed you. You needed your own ground first." She looked at me for a long time. "Are you standing firmly now?" I thought of the company, the employees, the customers, the transportation offices running because of what I had built. I nodded. "Yes." "Then keep it," she said. "One day, if she dares to rewrite history again in front of the people who matter, show them the ink." 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I received an email from a Forbes editor. They wanted to include me on a young leaders list in transportation technology. The article would be published on Thanksgiving Day. I looked at the date on the screen. It was not planned. It was not revenge. It was only the truth after 7 years of taking the long way around, finally choosing the right door to walk through. That Thanksgiving, I stood in front of the mirror a little after 7 in the morning, wearing a gray sweater, dark jeans, and my old boots. The only jewelry I wore was the pair of pearl earrings Grandma Eleanor had given me when I was 21. I looked exactly the way I always did. Ordinary. Quiet. There was no sign that in just a few hours that house would no longer belong to my mother's story. I picked up Grandma at 8. She was already sitting in her wheelchair, a box of homemade butter cookies resting on her lap. "You look fine," she said. "I look the same as always." Exactly. My parents' house in Glastonbury was bright with light. From the front door, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon spilled out with the sound of laughter. My mother stood near the kitchen, wearing a wine-red dress and pearls. She saw me push Grandma into the house. Her smile appeared quickly, thinly, never reaching her eyes. Oh, Evelyn, you brought Grandma. Wonderful. Since you still live close to her at least, it gives you something to keep busy with. The sentence was so light that anyone who did not understand would have thought it was praise. But I understood. She had just reminded the whole room that my life revolved around caring for an old woman. My father appeared from the kitchen and placed a hand on my shoulder for 1 second. Hi, sweetheart. Then he disappeared, as always leaving the scene before the truth needed a witness. Dinner began exactly at 4. 31 people sat around the long table. My mother raised her glass, thanked everyone, then turned toward Claire and Daniel. Claire lifted her hand to show off the ring. The whole room applauded. My mother glowed as if Claire's success made the house perfect. Claire has always been our pride, my mother said. A stable career, and soon a beautiful marriage. Then her gaze slid toward me. And Evelyn, she tilted her head. I just hope that one day you find your direction too. Mrs. Henderson Daniel's grandmother asked politely, "What kind of work do you do, Evelyn?" I had barely opened my mouth before my mother answered for me. She is still managing a few computer jobs. She left college years ago. We are still hoping she settles down. I set my fork down. From the end of the table, Grandma said clearly, "Evelyn is not the story people have turned her into." The air froze. My mother tightened her hand around her wineglass. "Mother, please. Today is Claire's happy day. If you were Evelyn, would you stay silent or stand up and tell the truth? Comment 1 for silence, 2 for speaking out. And remember to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss painful but very real moments of truth like this." After dinner, everyone moved into the living room. I stood beside the bookshelf holding a cup of tea. I had not touched. My mother sat on the sofa leaning toward Miss Henderson, speaking in a voice low enough to pretend it was private but loud enough for half the room to hear. "Just between us, sometimes. I think Evelyn left school because of emotional problems. We tried to help, but she always refused." I stepped in front of her. "Mom, stop." She looked up and her eyes immediately filled with tears. "I am only worried about you." "No. You are lying about me to a stranger." Her face went stiff. Then she said the sentence, the one that began this fateful night. "If you had ever done something worthwhile with your life, I would not have had to explain you to everyone." The room went completely silent. Then Uncle Nathan's phone buzzed. Uncle Nathan pulled his phone from his jacket pocket by reflex, the way people do when a new notification comes in. But the moment he looked at the screen, he froze. His finger did not keep scrolling. His face changed very slowly from confusion to shock, then into something that looked almost like pain. "Evelyn," he called. His voice was quiet, but because the room was still silent after my mother's sentence, my name carried clearly enough for everyone to turn. I looked at him. He looked at me, then at Grandma Eleanor. She was not surprised. She only sat still in her wheelchair, both hands resting on the thin blanket across her lap, her eyes calm like someone who had heard thunder from far away long before the storm arrived. "Is this you?" Uncle Nathan asked. Uncle Frank, standing near the fireplace, frowned. "What is going on?" Uncle Nathan handed him the phone. Uncle Frank read a few lines, and his mouth fell open. "My God." Aunt Margaret immediately reached for her own phone. Several others did the same. Within seconds, the room filled with the sound of tapping screens, held breaths, and broken whispers. I remained standing in front of the sofa while my mother stood less than 1 step away from me, still not understanding why everyone's attention had moved away from her. Then Aunt Margaret turned her screen toward everyone. On it was a photo of me, the first professional photo I had ever taken because Forbes had required it. I was wearing a black blazer, my hair neatly tied back, my eyes looking straight into the camera. Below it was the headline about Evelyn Parker, founder of Alderbridge Systems, the transportation software company that had just completed a $47 million deal. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name. Daniel held his phone, finished reading, then looked at Claire. Claire took the phone from him, her eyes moving across the screen. Then her hand dropped into her lap. Her engagement ring caught the light, but for the first time that night, no one was looking at it anymore. My mother was the last person to understand. "What are you all looking at?" she asked, her voice already stripped of its familiar softness. My father slowly stepped forward and handed her his phone. I watched my mother read. First, she frowned, as if the article had a spelling mistake. Then her lips parted. Then her face went pale. "That is impossible," she said. "This is not real." Uncle Nathan straightened. "It is on Forbes, Marjorie. Bloomberg just picked it up too. This is real." She turned to me. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother look at me without knowing what role to place me in. Not failure. Not burden. Not the daughter who embarrassed her. I stood in front of her still, in the old gray sweater. Still, the Evelyn she had just humiliated, but outside that house, the world was calling me by another name. "You built a company worth $47 million, she asked. "Yes." "And you did not tell your family?" That question made me feel more tired than the insult that came before it. Even as her story collapsed, she was still trying to stand in the ruins and ask why I had not invited her inside. "No," I said. "You never asked what I was building. You only kept telling everyone I could not build anything at all." No one answered. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. Mrs. Henderson, the woman my mother had just pulled into her little performance of pity, placed her napkin down on the table. "Marjorie," she said, not loudly, but with a sharpness that cut through the room 10 minutes ago, "you told me this girl had emotional problems." My mother opened her mouth. "That is not what I meant." "I think that is exactly what you meant." Daniel looked at Claire, but Claire did not look back. She lowered her head, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Uncle Frank shook his head, Aunt Margaret covered her mouth, and my father stood motionless beside the window, like a man finally realizing that his silence had taken a shape. As for me, I did not feel triumphant. I used to think that if this day ever came, I would want my mother to hurt the way I had hurt. But as I watched her standing in the middle of that room, gripping the phone as if it were a locked door, I only felt empty. Victory was not as loud as I had imagined. It was cold, clear, and impossible to turn back from. My mother tried to straighten herself. I could see it in the way she pulled her shoulders back, in the way her wet eyes began searching for something to hold on to. All her life, she had always managed to find at least one person who believed her. But that night, no one stepped toward her. "All right," she said, her voice trembling, but still trying to sound reasonable. "Maybe I said a few things that were not accurate. But I never tried to sabotage you." I looked at her for a long time. Some small lies can be forgiven because they are born from fear. But some lies are written down, sent away, and used to close a door right in front of your own child. "You called Northline Tech," I said. The air in the room changed completely. Claire lifted her head. My father turned toward my mother. Uncle Nathan frowned. "The software company in Hartford," I continued. "When I was 23, they had accepted me for an internship. One day before I was supposed to start, they withdrew the offer because someone in my family told them I was unreliable." "Evelyn, you cannot prove that," my mother said immediately. Too fast. Too sharp. I took my phone from my pocket. Slowly. Steadily. Grandma Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time in years, I knew this was the moment. I opened the photo of the email she had kept in the old shoebox, then handed the phone to Uncle Nathan. Please read it for me. He took it. His voice was calm at first, but as he continued, every word grew heavier. From Marjorie Harper to the Human Resources Department at Northline Tech. I am writing out of concern for my daughter Evelyn Harper. She has a history of irresponsibility, and I do not want your company to be placed in an uncomfortable position. I love my daughter, but I believe in honesty, so I feel obligated to warn you in advance. He stopped. There was no need to read more. The room was so silent that the heater beneath the floor sounded like a sigh. Claire covered her mouth. Aunt Margaret looked at my mother as if she were seeing clearly for the first time the woman she had defended. Uncle Nathan placed the phone on the coffee table. You ruined your own daughter's opportunity, he said. My mother shook her head. I was only trying to protect her. From what his voice dropped. From success. Grandma Eleanor spoke then. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 7 years of silence. Evelyn left school to take care of me. You were the one who did not come to the hospital. You were the one who told her not to tell anyone. And when she tried to rebuild her life, you destroyed that too. Mother, my mother choked out. Do not mother me. Grandma looked straight at her. You were not ashamed of Evelyn. You were ashamed that if people knew the truth, they would ask where you were when your mother needed you most. My father finally spoke. That is true. His voice was hoarse, small, but everyone in the room heard it. My mother sat down on the sofa. No graceful posture. No prepared tissue. She dropped into the seat, like someone who had just lost the stage beneath her feet. I stood in the middle of that room listening, as the true story of my life was spoken aloud by someone else. It did not make me feel light immediately, but it opened the first door. I took Grandma Eleanor out of that house as the wind began turning cold on the porch. No one stopped me. No one had the courage to say the familiar lines like, "Stay a little longer," or "Do not make things more tense." For the first time, they understood that their silence was exactly what had made everything tense for 7 years. I booked a small room at a hotel near the highway, where the hallway lights were a pale yellow and the ice machine hummed steadily through the night. Grandma slept in the bed beside the window, one hand resting on top of the blanket. I sat on the edge of the other bed, still wearing my gray sweater, watching my phone screen light up and go dark. Many messages came in, but I did not open them. I did not want to read anyone's regret, while my body was still shaking from standing inside the truth for too long. The next morning, before the sky was fully bright, Claire called. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Evelyn, she said, her voice hoarse, as if she had been crying all night. I need to tell you something. I stayed still, watching Grandma sleep. I knew about the call to Northline Tech. The sentence did not make me angry right away. It made me cold, as if someone had opened a winter door inside my chest. How long have you known? Claire took a deep breath. 5 years. Mom said she had handled it for you. She said you were not ready for a real job, and that if you failed, the whole family would be embarrassed again. I closed my eyes. So you knew Mom destroyed my opportunity. I knew. And I stayed silent. This time she did not add a but. She did not add an excuse. She did not say she was young or afraid of Mom, or that she did not want a war in the family. The fact that she did not defend herself made the confession hurt even more. Why, I asked. Claire's voice broke. Because if I stood on your side, I would become you. I spent my whole life trying not to become the person Mom used as a warning. I let you stand there alone so I could keep being the daughter she was proud of. I looked out the window. A thin fog covered the parking lot. Someone pulled a suitcase past the glass, unaware that inside this room, a family had just been taken apart piece by piece. I am not calling to ask you to forgive me, Claire continued. I am calling because you deserve to hear me admit it. I used your silence as my shield. And I am sorry. It took me a long time before I could speak. I do not know what to do with that apology yet. I understand. But I heard it. On the other end of the line, Claire began to cry. Then she told me Daniel had paused the wedding plans. He said that before stepping into marriage, she needed to understand why an entire family could watch someone be hurt and still call it normal. I did not feel happy. I did not feel pity either. I only felt the truth, spreading outward slowly and painfully, but finally no longer living inside me alone. That afternoon, I returned to my parents' house to pick up Grandma Eleanor's overnight bag and the box of butter cookies we had left on the kitchen counter. The house was uncomfortably quiet. Half-burned candles still sat on the table. The tablecloth still held its neat creases. There was no laughter, no music, no one performing the role of the perfect family. My mother sat at the kitchen table without makeup, her eyes red and swollen. She was wearing an old University of Connecticut sweatshirt, the one she had once buried deep in her closet, because it reminded her that I had once had a path before she turned it into a stain. "Evelyn," she said, "I can explain." I stood in the doorway. "I am listening." She placed both hands on the table. "I grew up poor. People looked down on me my whole life. I only wanted our family to look all right in other people's eyes. And I was the part that made the family look wrong." She looked down. "I did not know how to love you when you kept making everything fall outside the plan." That sentence hurt, but at least it was more honest than the tears she had once used in front of our relatives. I breathed in slowly. "I did not come here to argue. I am not coming back to that dinner table. Not for Thanksgiving. Not for Christmas. Not for any family gathering until you do 3 things. 1. You must tell every person who was there yesterday the truth about why I left college. 2. You must stop speaking for me to the family. Anyone who wants to contact me can contact me themselves. 3. You need therapy. Not to win me back, but to understand how you could hurt me and call it protecting the family." My father was sitting by the window holding a cold cup of coffee. I turned to him. "You have a part in this too. Not because you lied as much as Mom did, but because you stayed silent long enough for the lie to survive." He lowered his head. "I know." I picked up Grandma's bag. When I reached the door, my mother asked very quietly, "If I do those things, will you forgive me?" I turned back. "I do not know. But that is the only way I may one day be able to sit in the same room with you without making myself smaller. If you believe that setting boundaries does not make someone ungrateful, comment, 'I choose peace.' And, if this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories about family pain and the way a person takes her life back." I stepped outside. I did not slam the door. I did not leave behind a cruel final sentence. I simply left not as a daughter running away, but as a grown woman building a door for her own life. In February of the following year, Grandma Eleanor turned 81. I held her birthday in my new apartment in Boston, where the living room windows looked down over a small garden lightly covered with snow. There was no big party, no long table, where anyone had to sit at the far end, no wishes spoken, only so other people could hear them. There was only a chocolate cake from the bakery on the corner, a few candles, a pot of Earl Grey tea, and the people who truly wanted to be there. Uncle Nathan arrived early, wearing the ridiculous birthday hat Grandma forced him to keep on the entire time. Aunt Margaret sent flowers with a very short handwritten card. "I am sorry I believed too quickly and asked too late." Tommy drove up from Connecticut with his wife and their little child, who kept secretly wiping frosting off the cake with one fingertip. For the first time in years, I looked at a room with relatives in it and did not feel my chest tighten. Claire came too. She came alone. No, Daniel. No sparkling engagement ring on her hand. She brought a bouquet of white gardenias, Grandma's favorite flowers. When Claire placed them on the table, Grandma looked at her for a long time and said, "So you finally remembered what I like." Claire laughed. It was a small laugh, a little broken but real. My mother did not come. I had invited her. She texted back that she was not ready. Strangely, for the first time, I did not hear that sentence as an excuse. Not ready, at least, was the truth. And the truth, even when it arrives late, is still a place where people can begin again. Near the end of the evening, Grandma sat at the head of the table and looked around the room. Her eyes moved over Uncle Nathan's ridiculous hat, Claire's flowers, the child with frosting on his chin, then finally stopped on me. "This is a good table," she said. I understood what she meant. A good table is not good because it is expensive, or because it is filled with every relative by blood. It is good because no one has to be made smaller so someone else can feel larger. It is good because there my name was no longer spoken with pity. I am Evelyn Harper. Some people know me as Evelyn Parker. I am 29 years old, and it took me 7 years to learn one very simple thing. I did not need to become the winner in someone else's story. I only needed to take back the right to tell my own